there's a moment when the empath finally says, "No more." And in that moment, everything changes. Not just for them, but for the narcissist who thought they could keep them caged forever. Because no matter how much love they gave, the empath's greatest power was never their love. It was their ability to finally choose themselves. And when they do, that's a kind of freedom no one can manipulate. I once sat across from a woman who told me that every time she walked away from a conversation with her partner, she felt smaller. Not just emotionally, but physically, energetically, spiritually. As if her presence in the room had to shrink just so his ego could stretch. She said it with a laugh at first, like she was trying to minimize the weight of what she had just confessed. But you could hear it in her voice. The exhaustion, the confusion, the grief of losing herself one silent compromise at a time. She wasn't weak, not even close. She was one of the strongest people I'd ever met. The kind of person who could walk into a room and feel who needed comfort before a word was spoken. The kind who carried stories that weren't her own because no one else had offered to carry them. She was deeply intuitive, a beautiful soul. What many would call an empath. But what I saw in her that day, what so many others carry without knowing, was something deeper. She was a super empath. And that's the thing. Super empaths don't just feel emotions, they read them. They don't just comfort pain, they understand its origin. They have this rare, almost sacred ability to sit in the dark with someone else without flinching. That's not just sensitivity, that's emotional bravery, that's strength. And paradoxically, that strength is often the very thing that draws narcissists to them. Because narcissists, beneath the facade of confidence and charm, are starving for what the super empath naturally carries: depth, connection, and authenticity. A narcissist survives through image, through control, through projection. But a super empath doesn't fall for the show. Not really. They sense the dissonance, even if they don't yet have the language to name it. They see the emotional hunger behind the arrogance. They feel the shame underneath the manipulation. They're not fooled. They're just hopeful. And that hope, that's what keeps them there, longer than they should be. They believe, with all the imagined standing in the middle of a tug of war. But you're the only one holding the rope. Your hands are blistered, your muscles are aching, and you're pulling with everything you've got. On the other side, there's no one pulling back physically, but you feel resistance all the same. Not because someone is gripping the rope, but because their silence is deafening, their criticism is cutting, and their manipulation has made you question whether you're even playing a game you agreed to join in the first place. That's what it feels like to love a narcissist when you are a super empath. You're not in a relationship. You're in a performance, and you're playing every role. You're the giver, the fixer, the forgiver, the one who apologizes for being hurt. And at some point, the line between love and survival gets so blurry, you don't even remember how it started. You just know you're exhausted. See, the super empath doesn't stay because they don't know they're being manipulated. They stay because they believe that love can change things. They believe in redemption. They believe in healing. They see the wounded child beneath the narcissist's rage. They hear the silent screams behind the cruelty. And their compassion, their enormous, tender, powerful compassion, tells them not to give up. But here's the hard truth: compassion without boundaries isn't love. It's self-abandonment. Narcissists thrive in emotional imbalance. They push, you explain. They withdraw, you chase. They hurt, you comfort. It's not a fair fight because it's not supposed to be. They are not looking for mutuality. They are looking for dominance wrapped in the illusion of connection. And the super empath, because of their deep capacity to feel, often mistakes pain for purpose. The moment everything begins to shift, the moment the narcissist starts to lose control, is when the super empath sees the rope for what it is. It's not a bond. It's not love. It's not even real connection. It's a leash made of guilt, obligation, and emotional gaslighting. And the greatest act of power, the greatest act of love toward themselves, is to drop it. When the super empath stops explaining, stops defending, stops hoping for closure from someone who has no intention of offering it, the narcissist is left standing in their own echo chamber. And it terrifies them. Because without your attention, without your energy, they have no mirror to keep their identity intact. That is what narcissists fear the most. Not confrontation, not criticism, but indifference. The super empath doesn't need to scream, doesn't need to retaliate. All they have to do is stop playing, and the whole illusion crumbles. So the question becomes, what are you still holding on to that's hurting you more than it's helping you? What are you still explaining, still justifying, still trying to fix? Even though every part of you is tired, there's nothing wrong with being someone who loves deeply. But there is something deeply wrong with believing that your love must cost you your peace. You're allowed to stop mid, tug, open your hands, and let the rope fall. Not out of bitterness, not out of vengeance, but because you finally understand the game was never yours to begin with. When I was younger, I believed the world needed me to be soft, and so I cried easily. I felt everything deeply. I could walk into a room and tell who was grieving, who was pretending, and who was just barely holding it together. And somewhere along the way, I got the message, maybe not directly, but certainly loud enough, that this sensitivity was a liability, that I was too much, too emotional, too vulnerable, too something. So like many super empaths, I began to armor up, but not in the obvious ways. I didn't become hard or cold. I didn't stop caring. I just started doubting what I felt. Doubting whether my intuition could be trusted. Doubting if maybe the people who hurt me were right, that I was overreacting, too sensitive, always taking things the wrong way. That's what it feels like to carry emotional depth in a world that doesn't always honor it. And for a super empath in the hands of a narcissist, that doubt becomes dangerous. Because it's not just self-doubt anymore. It's weaponized. The narcissist uses it like a scalpel. Slowly. Subtly. They make you question your memory, your tone, your motives. You begin to apologize for feelings you haven't even had yet. You start managing their emotions while abandoning your own. And yet, this is the plot twist, that very sensitivity, that very ache, that constant awareness that once felt like a curse, eventually becomes the empath's superpower. Because when a super empath starts to heal, truly heal, something extraordinary happens. They begin to see the pattern. They see how their childhood taught them to be hyper, attuned to everyone else's moods, because maybe safety depended on it. They see how they learned to avoid conflict by absorbing it. They recognize how they've been groomed, not just by narcissists, but by a society that praises empathy only when it's convenient and quiet. And when that awareness hits, it doesn't make them colder. It makes them wiser. They start asking different questions. Not, what's wrong with me? But, why did I believe my needs were negotiable? Not, why did they hurt me? But, why did I stay where my pain was ignored? And those questions crack something open, not in a destructive way, but in a liberating one. Because when the super empath begins to set boundaries, they're not just protecting themselves. They're rewriting the script. They're saying, I can be kind without being exploited. I can be generous without being drained. I can care deeply and still walk away when I am not being cared for in return. The narcissist doesn't expect this. They expect the tears, the bargaining, the confusion. What they don't expect is clarity. They don't know what to do when the super empath no longer needs their validation, no longer explains no longer feels guilt for choosing peace over chaos. That's when the power shifts. The wound becomes armor. But not the kind of armor that walls off love. The kind that protects it. The kind that says, I love myself enough to stop betraying my heart just to soothe yours. So let me ask you, where are you still trying to earn the love you already give so freely? Where have you mistaken your ability to endure pain as proof of your value? The world doesn't need you to stop feeling. It needs you to stop bleeding for people who offer you knives when you ask for grace. You are not too sensitive. You are not too emotional. You are not too much. You are simply awakening. A friend of mine once said to me, I don't even recognize myself anymore. But in the best possible way. She had this quiet strength in her eyes when she said it. Not the kind of strength that comes from being untouched by pain, but the kind that's been shaped by it. The kind that says, I walked through hell, but I carried myself out. She had been in a relationship with a narcissist for over a decade. And she wasn't naive, far from it. She was brilliant, emotionally intelligent, spiritually aware. But when you're a super empath, love isn't just a feeling. It's a mission. You see people. You feel them. You want to help them rise. And when someone you love is broken, your instinct isn't to walk away. It's to stay and try to heal them with your presence. And narcissists, they're magnetic to empaths for one painful reason. They present as the broken ones who just need a little more love, a little more patience, a little more understanding. And so the empath gives more and more until they realize they're bleeding into a void. Until they realize the love they offer isn't being received, it's being consumed. But here's what narcissists never see coming the moment the super empath wakes up. It doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual, quiet, like morning light creeping into a dark room. A moment of truth here, a gut instinct there. A time when they cry, but this time, it's not from guilt. It's from the clarity that this is not what love is supposed to feel like. And then something beautiful happens. They begin to remember. They remember who they were before the gaslighting, before the guilt trips, before they began to apologize for things they didn't do and walk on eggshells in their own home. They remember the sound of their own voice, not the one shaped by fear, but the one rooted in truth. And that voice, it begins to speak up. It says things like, no more. I'm not responsible for fixing you. My peace is not negotiable. I deserve to feel safe, even in love. That's when the narcissist starts to lose control. Because their power was never in their strength. It was in your silence, your confusion, your doubt. Once you stop believing the lie that you are too sensitive, once you stop internalizing their chaos as your fault, they can no longer distort your reality. And the empath doesn't need revenge. They don't want to play the same game in reverse. What they want is freedom. And that freedom doesn't come from seeing the narcissist suffer. It comes from no longer needing anything from them. Not closure, not apology, not understanding. The real awaken is when you realize you need to be understood by someone who made it their mission not to understand you. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to defend your healing. You just need to rise. Not in anger, but in truth. Not to prove a point, but to reclaim your life. Not to teach them a lesson, but to teach yourself what it means to be whole again. So I want to ask you this. Where in your life are you still waiting for permission to be free? What parts of you are aching to be seen, not by someone else, but by you? Because once you see yourself clearly, once you love yourself fiercely, you'll stop handing that power to people who only ever offered you crumbs. You don't need to explain your healing. You just need to trust it. There's this moment, and it often comes quietly, when the noise has settled and the survival mode has finally shut off. When the super empath looks in the mirror and realizes, I made it out. And it doesn't always feel like a victory parade. Sometimes, it feels more like standing in the middle of a battlefield after the war has ended. Unsure of how to celebrate freedom when all you've ever known is fighting for it. But there is power in that stillness. There is healing in that pause. Because what comes next isn't just recovery, it's reclamation. Reclaiming your time, your energy, your joy, your voice, your truth. When a super empath finally steps out of the gravitational pull of a narcissist, it's like re-entering their own life for the first time. And it's disorienting. You question everything, your choices, your patterns, your willingness to tolerate pain in the name of love. But that questioning, that's the doorway to wisdom. That's where the transformation lies. You see, super empaths were never broken. They were just never taught how to guard their hearts with the same passion they gave them away. They were celebrated for their kindness, but rarely protected for their depth. They were told they were strong, but only when that strength served someone else's healing. But now they're learning a new kind of strength. The strength to walk away, not because they're bitter, but because they're finally brave. The strength to say, this doesn't feel good, and honor that knowing. The strength to rest without guilt, to feel without shame, to love without losing themselves in the process. And the most radical strength of all, the strength to stop saving people who were never willing to save themselves. Here's the truth no one tells you. Healing from a narcissist isn't just about leaving them. It's about returning to yourself. Slowly, tenderly, fiercely. It's about realizing that the love you so desperately tried to give away is the same love that now needs to be poured back into you. It means learning to sit with discomfort. Not because someone else is demanding it of you, but because growth is uncomfortable. It means grieving the version of you that stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she believed in someone who didn't know how to receive love without destroying it. And that grief, it becomes grace. You forgive yourself. You thank yourself. You hold the hand of the one who kept going, even when she had every reason to give up. That version of you deserves to be celebrated. Not for surviving abuse, but for choosing to live beyond it. Because in the end, the super empath doesn't just survive the narcissist. They transcend them. They outgrow the lies. They outlast the chaos. They outshine the darkness by becoming the light they once begged someone else to bring. So if you're listening to this and wondering if you're strong enough to walk away, to heal, to rebuild, let me tell you this, you already are. You're not starting from scratch. You're starting from wisdom. You're not empty. You're clearing space. You're not lost. You're finally on your way home. And when you arrive, when you fully land in your own life, you'll understand what the narcissist never could. That real power doesn't come from control. It comes from clarity, from choosing yourself, not once, but every single day.